Welcome to once again another In Conversations with. Today we have our guest here, Craig Smith. Craig and I knew each other from a while back, and we were fortunate enough to kind of work in the Agile meetup group, which you run. Thanks for letting me rant there for one of the nights and talk about my stuff. I'll let you also, I guess, introduce yourself in terms of what you've been doing, what you've been around in this industry doing.
Yeah, so Craig Smith, I'm an Agile coach. Been doing this Agile caper for 15 plus years now. Seems a long time. Started my journey back when we didn't really know what we were doing then. There was the Extreme Programming Explained book, and about 10 people were trying to figure out what it all meant. So a lot of things have changed since that point. As you mentioned, I'm one of the co-organisers of the Agile Brisbane meetup here in our fine city of Brisbane. So for any of the viewers who are ever in Brisbane, come along and say hello. And I'm also a director of the Global Agile Alliance. So those who don't know the Agile Alliance, it's basically formed when the manifesto was formed. So the 17 authors of the manifesto formed that, and its role is really to promote the knowledge and vision of agility and support communities in any way they can. So that's an interesting journey I've been on, and then a whole bunch of other little things that I do. I speak at lots of conferences around the place. I have my own podcast, which I co-host with a couple of my friends.
That's great.
Called the Agile Revolution. So lots of things. Yeah,
awesome. I guess I was Scrum Master certified last year, and then when we met as a, I guess, kind of relatively newbie on the block. I don't know if anyone's kind of said that about you. It's like in Queensland, you're kind of like the grandfather of Agile. It seems like everybody I've spoken to somehow knows you and worked with you before.
Grandfather, come on. He knows a few grey hairs over here, but
his father, I don't know. It's kind of like all road leads to Craig. It seems to.
It's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I think it's
potentially.
It's a small town, and a small community. So you have to run across people at some point or another.
So recently, maybe not recently, you could probably date this better than I. There's this big kind of phenomena happening where business is trying to get into Agile as well. Traditionally, I guess when Agile first started, it was to try to improve how we deliver software. Now there's this awareness of agility, or there's an appetite for business to be more agile in its original definition of agile. They want to be nimble, fast reacting, and so on. And a lot of organizations, I guess, here very notably started with Suncorp, and then recently ANZ is also doing that, and so a lot of organizations are going into this. And I've heard terms like it's enterprise agile for business, all these words. What is, I guess, in your definition, what that agile in business is? Like, how does that look like?
So business agility is probably the name that most people are landing on there, but there are lots of different flavours as there is in the Agile community. I think if you go back to 2001, in fact, even if you go back to Scrum, really, if you look at the core of Scrum, there's nothing in there that really says that it has to be about software. It's about knowledge work. And the kinds of organisations that are trying to do business agility are for the most part in business work. Even if you look at ANZ, who in this country is probably the biggest organisation that's retrying this whole approach, they've quite purposely said that this is about their back office, head office operations, not their branches, because your branches are your transactional work. So if you're digging holes or serving burgers at a burger joint or those kind of things, that's transactional work, and that's more the lean type processes. But when you're talking about knowledge work, agility is where it starts. So Scrum already dealt with that. The Agile Manifesto, or the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, as it's aptly called, did call out software directly, although the 10 authors famously agreed at the 10th anniversary that if they could actually change the wording, they would have taken the word software out and put solutions in there. So again, it never really predicated that it couldn't be about software. It's just that that by, I guess, design. But if you think about 2001, when that happened, I have this theory about the manifesto that if they had have written that even 18 months earlier, I just don't think it would have got the traction. I think it was just the right time.
Yeah.
We just gone through Y2K.
Yeah.
The .com boom was booming.
Yeah.
Technology was at a place where all those things could actually happen.
Yeah.
But at that time, we still treated projects separately. We used to do IT projects and we used to do business projects. And in a lot of organisations, you don't see it so much now, but at that time you would have IT project managers and business project managers, and you do them completely separately.
Yes.
But somewhere in the last 10 years or so, there has become this practice, even from the project management perspective, that actually we just do projects, and that's because IT, particularly when the internet really became prominent, when smartphones became prominent, that actually everything has an IT component to it, and therefore those things merged.
Yeah.
And so, as agility in the software space continued to blossom, and it was getting tied up with the same delivery cycles that the software side was working on, it made common sense that actually the business processes should probably come into the same cycle. So that's sort of the theory of why those things come together.
Yeah, and it's interesting. What I guess two things that came to mind when you were saying that, where we run, Agile 101, just an introductory thing for the training. I'm pointing there because they're doing training at the moment over in that room. And in there, I kind of tweaked the manifesto a little bit to kind of downplay the software side. But it's definitely, I can see, like when I finished, when I got Scrum certification, the first thing I did was actually go home and try to do Scrum at home. Because you can apply it. And
I ran my whole life Agile.
Yes.
And the only way I knew I had to be here today was I got to the top of the board. And
yes. And even marketing, like marketing and HR for us here, we do Kanban, for example. So we're trying to be an Agile organization ourselves. But it's also the second thing though, with the hand gestures, it's like two loops becoming one. At the moment, it's still that phenomena, I feel. Again, maybe you can elaborate on how distinct or how merged it is, but I see that organizations are still kind of running Agile in kind of two loop cycles. Business are trying to get into this Agile thing, and they have an Agile initiative, but somehow the agility happens within the department, within the division or the unit, and then IT projects have Agile and Agile delivery, and they seem to be two cycles running pretty separately, have different backlogs and different outcomes, whereas what you're saying, and I believe, is that we need to kind of have one. You want to comment on that?
Yes, there's two parts to that. First, if you think of the IT loop, because we've had Scrum and the manifesto around, Scrum's 21 plus years old now, so it's been around for a long time. There's really no excuses to doing software in any other way. There are still some large corporate and government type holdouts, but for the most part, it's who's not doing Agile and software to who is. So we've got that kind of nailed. What's happened is that as you bring product owners and subject matter experts and those type of people through, and they see that they're actually making traction, what's happened over those 20 years is then business folks have tried to take that back into their departments and run internal operations in a more agile fashion to varying success. And the thing is that if you actually look at all the agile practices, if you look at just the process practices like retrospectives and stand-ups and showcases and estimation and all those types of things, they're just processes, and regardless of whether you're doing a business project or an IT project, those things hold true. But then there were technical processes as well, and interestingly, I think people disregard those. But about probably 10 years ago now, I started looking at those and going, actually, they're the things that make the big difference. When I coach business teams on agility, some of those practices are the ones that are the things that are missing in business. One prime example is test-driven development. Now, test-driven development at its core is completely about software and doing testing first. But if you think about it, when you're doing knowledge work, one of the things that a lot of organisations are really not good at is knowing when they're done. Yeah. And so having a clear definition of done, but writing your tests first, even for a business process, adds a whole bunch of value. And so when I take people through their tasks or their cards, you may not necessarily write them as traditional story cards. The first thing I do is say, turn it over and go, how would you know you're done? and they kind of look at you as if you're a complete moron, right? And they go, well, when it's done, and they go, well, tell me what that is, and then they'll roll things off. They'll go, oh, well, I guess when my manager signs it off, and I guess when that thing gets on the intranet, and I guess when and all of a sudden you've got this list of 6, 7, 8 different things that you need to verify. And so once you get that in and you can say, well, now that thing is done and we've moved over, then they get the same benefit that instead of this percentage complete fallacy that we used to run in, they actually have, working product as the primary measure of progress, which is, the 7th principle in the manifesto, and they can move forward. So that's the 2 loops, and so that's why that's been happening. But the business loop's always kind of moved behind a little bit because it really took people from who worked on the IT projects to bring it back. But if you now look at where we are, and we're recording this in 2017, that the whole business landscape is just moving at a faster pace, and there's still this fallacy that. And Dave West from Forrester, when he was there, coined the term water scrumfall, which is really the essence of what you're talking about. Is that we got really good at doing software in the middle, but it takes us way too long to get things kicked off, which is the water scrum, and then we weren't so good at putting things out the back end, which is the scrumfall. Now DevOps has come along to fix the scrumfall problem. The water scrum problem is what we're talking about here. How can we get, when we get an idea, how can we actually get that into the hands of the engineers and then deliver it? Because you talk to Scrum teams now and they still go, but we got it too late, or they've been asked to do 9 months worth of work in 6 months. But if you go and look in the boardrooms and meeting rooms around these large corporates, that there have been people chewing on these ideas for 6, 9, 12 months, having meetings going, are we ready yet? And finally it's this, we're running late, and that's when it moves along. So if we can get that loop to actually say, once we get an idea, and so portfolio Kanban is really the answer to this. Once an idea comes along, pull the most important idea through. Instead of going through all this, should we fund it, should we not fund it type thing, and actually just pull things through as the most important. Then put teams on that instead of this whole project notion of then having to go get budget and pull a team together and disband a team. If you have this product team type idea that just, here's an idea, let's match the right team to the job and let them go do it, you get a lot more benefits. So you're seeing more and more of it, and interestingly, the Scaled Agile framework is the one that has started, I guess, to push that along a little bit. Whether you like or dislike SAFe is not the discussion here, and I have my own thoughts about things in that method that I'm not a fan of. But the one thing you can is that if you go look at that top layer in SAFe, that whole portfolio type thing about setting things up and moving it through, some really good stuff in there, and that's really where those 2 loops are merging together.
Yeah, for sure. We are looking at SAFe, especially at that layer as well, see what we can use for our framework. Agile was what I used for the front bit. So I didn't want
Agile's, but actually that's still the whole thing, because the waterfall method was still idea through to delivery, and so when you're doing an agile type process, but it's just taking you too long to get through the loop, that's Agile. And of course, you do it quickly. That's fragile, right?
Fragile.
Or tragile when it goes really bad.
You just compress the thing and
that's it. It's just death march going really quickly.
So how do you see this? I don't know, maybe or maybe not. This whole innovation phenomenon happening at the moment with all this rapid prototyping and hubs coming up all over the place. They use design thinking, and do you see that as a confusing the matter or helping with the cause that we just talked about in terms of pushing it?
So when you talk about that single loop, I mean, the lean startup was probably the when that put that in the hands of real people. The Eric Ries's book from 2009 was to this day still the only the only process book that ever made the New York Times bestseller list, which means that everyday people actually went and read this, and and just talks about Agile kind of offhand all the way through the book. So that put it in the hands, but that started to introduce this idea of experimentation and pivots and minimal viable product, and the problem with MVP is it's a term now that's completely overloaded and misunderstood and the like. When you talk about agility, though, when you talk about the umbrella of Agile, the big tent, there are so many things underneath that, and there's a lot of disagreement about Agile. But the thing is, it's just a term, it's just a layer. It's all these things fall underneath that. And Lean Startup is one of the things that that falls underneath there. As to my mind, does design thinking, even though it came from the user experience area. That's a really good way at the beginning of a project just to get people on board and get started really quickly.
That's right.
The thing is that people treat it as a framework of its own right, and then try to add sort of other things on the end. If you just look at it as a way of kickstarting those ideas, it's a great thing. So the thing is we start to get disrupted, and we talk about disruption a lot. And for a lot of our large corporates, they still haven't really been truly disrupted. Not like, for example, the music industry or the or the taxi industry, for example. Things like banking, there hasn't really been a real disruption at this point. Insurance, motor vehicle manufacture, those things are still relatively as they were before. But as you start to, your competitors start to change, start to think, experimentation is really going to be the key, because that's what the small startups are doing.
Very fast into.
So you're seeing that a lot in large organisations. They are doing small lean startups internally. Unfortunately, they're still for the kind of the way out, or the products for the millennials, and not sort of baked into their full way of business. And the organisations that I think start to move that way will start to get the benefits from it. You only have to look at companies like Apple or Google, just an example we all know. Yes, okay, they're in similar businesses to a certain extent, but they're large corporates. They're as large. I mean, Apple's the biggest company by profit in the world. That they run in that particular way, and so if we really want to be innovative, that's the only way of going.
Yeah. So you mentioned again big umbrella of Agile, and there's many tools as agreement, disagreement. I always know that there's enough knowledge or information out in this information age. You can just Google anything, you can read anything, go for a course or anything. But true wisdom is know when to use what. And that's how, I guess, coaches come about, because you know how to use information and knowledge that you have in the right situation to actually get the job done. Now, I guess, if you were to give tips to Agile practitioners, people who are on the journey or have been on the journey for a little while, kind of, stuck in the IT loop of Agile or Scrum, what would you say to them? Like, how must we relook at these things? Because one of the frustrations I have is sometimes you meet some practitioners and they're Jira experts. They're not Agile practitioners, and so especially now with business looking into this and design thinking, all the new stuff coming. How would we need to? How would, or have there been efforts to kind of upskill or make the Agile community more aware of the changes? So
this is a side thought. You mentioned Jira. So I used to be a Jira administrator, and there was So that was the job I did right before I actually got the title of being an Agile coach. And when I became an Agile coach, I remember my manager saying, "You're going to have to give up your Jira administrator privileges," and I fought very hard about not doing that. And the reason why is not so much that I wanted to continue living Jira, but actually it was a great to teams to actually sort their Agile problems, because you'd get this phone call and someone would go, "How do I display 37 columns on a Jira?" And if you just sort of gone to them and said that sounds dopey, that's they wouldn't talk to you. But when you had something like Jira as your you could go, well, let's sit down and talk about your process for a little bit, and then we'll try and map it. And by the end of the conversation, firstly they'd realise that wasn't really going to be a great Jira implementation either, but they actually realised that 37 columns probably wasn't also the best answer. So just as an aside, you can actually make those, because people like to talk in tools. Use the tool as the starting point for your conversation. It's quite often a way of getting people who wouldn't talk to you otherwise. Talk to you. But I guess coming back to your question, what advice would I give? I gave a talk a few years ago that I still do around the circuit every now and again, called 40 Agile Methods in 40 Minutes, which is a really quick process. And the whole point of that was that most people, when they think of agility, really think of Scrum, so 2 week sprints and those type of things. And I want people to realise that there's at least 39 more. There's actually about 140 of them, but I picked 40 in different areas, because if you actually think about the big tent of agility, the thing is that we pull things from them. That's why I prefer the term Agile over Scrum, because we pull things. So, for example, if you've used Moscow for prioritisation, Moscow was popularised by DSDM. Right. Now DSTM's got a bunch of good things, and it's got a bunch of stuff that I wouldn't use because it's 25 years old, and it's quite heavyweight. But there's things we can learn.
Yeah.
People like Alistair Cockburn have wrote methods like Crystal back in the day, which have died off as a method in their own right. But a lot of the key concepts, things like building quality in, putting people first, were part of the Crystal method, and they've just become synonymous with what we think of agility.
Yeah.
And then you've got things on the outside, so things like DevOps. Right? DevOps doesn't really stand on its own. It needs other things to help it out. Lean startup, for example, or Kanban, still need things like stand-ups and retrospectives, even though they're not actually built into the process.
Yeah.
And so you need to borrow from each of those methods. And even when you look at these agile in a box type things like the scaled agile framework or disciplined agile delivery, or less to a lesser extent, I guess. They're not agile in a box. They're just a starting point that says, here, if you've got a bunch of problems, these might help you. So I'm not convinced that PI planning with 200 people in a room every 3 months is necessarily the best thing for all organisations. For some organisations, that's a perfect method, and for some, it's not. So just because it prescribes it doesn't mean you should keep doing it. Because the true thing about agile being nimble is that continuous improvement. The 12th principle is that we will continuously improve, and that is why agile as a concept hasn't really died in 20 years, because the whole community has built new things. We're the better for having Kanban and SAFe and less and lean startup and all these things that have come into our community, because if we just stayed with where we were in 2001, most of those methods as they were have evolved. I mean, Scrum has evolved. In fact, as we're recording this, just yesterday, there's a new version of the Scrum Guide out. Where it actually says the 3 questions in stand-up are not really the 3 questions anymore, which is great, because most of us have been talking about that for a long time. They're just a guide. So they're not prescribed anymore. They are just a guide. So because it's evolving, Agile itself, because of the 12th principle, evolves. That's why Agile doesn't die, but as practitioners, we need to continue to learn. So I subscribe to Alistair Cockburn's Oath of Non-Allegiance, which basically says, don't stick to one method, right? Look to all schools of thoughts and heritage and pick the right thing for the job. And so you've got to look outside of there. And if you truly are an Agile coach, that's that re-level, journeyman type learning. You're constantly on that journey of learning new things.
Yeah, kind of self-retrospect, constantly looking at yourself and kind of know what can we use. I think it's the other thing as well. What I found is it's very to be a coach, or to actually be a very effective agile or scrum master or any of that types of role, you need to be a big people person. You kind of need to understand teams and how people work together and what would work, what wouldn't work, your stakeholders, and I don't know if it's already being done. It's almost like you kind of need to go a little bit deeper into the people, the psychology side of things, whether those things can be actually be featured or spoken about at conferences and
they are. I mean, we used to think about teams, and that was about as far as we had to go. But people build things, right? People need to make machines work, and so ultimately, all the issues we have are about people, and people working together and collaborating and working effectively. And so that's really the underlying key. There's a lot of work being done now in psychology and things like non-violent communication and inclusion and all those types of things that are so important to making a healthy environment to work in. All fall under that umbrella as well, and you can bring into that leadership. The management schools have taken a long time to move out of industrial thinking type approaches to management, command and control, to being this more leadership type approach. And whilst that's been running for 20 plus, 30 odd years now, it's only really just starting to push through and change a little bit. And so that affects project management and all these other things as well. So all these things tie in together. And you look at even things like Dan Pink's Drive, for example, completely unrelated to the Agile community. But the Agile community leapt onto that because it was something that was useful to us. And so that's the beauty of the Agile community. When there are things that fall outside of there, we bring them in.
Yeah, that's great. So that's really insightful. We went from business agility to trying to see if we can actually put the two loops into one, and then as practitioner, we talked about not sticking to one. Be well read and understanding different methods. Use the right one. Have the wisdom to know when to use the right one. And also going a bit into psychology. Thanks for that. Thanks for joining us today. And hopefully see you next time.
Thank you.
Cheers.